Hello, I'm Dilek Tuna and you're watching A News. Let's see the top stories this hour. Trump says Iran talks fall short as ceasefire pressure grows. Zelenskyy seeks more Patriot missiles as Russian strikes intensify. And global temperatures are set to pass the key climate limit, according to the UN Weather Agency. US President Donald Trump says talks with Iran are moving but not far enough. Washington has rejected an Iranian state TV report about a draft deal on the Strait of Hormuz as a complete fabrication, while fresh US strikes near Bandar Abbas are adding new pressure to an already fragile ceasefire.
US President Donald Trump says he is still not satisfied with the terms of a possible deal with Iran, despite signs of progress in talks to end the conflict. Speaking at a cabinet meeting, Trump said Iran was eager to reach an agreement, but added that negotiations had not gotten there yet. He repeated that Washington was prepared to resume strikes if talks failed.
And we have the strongest military anywhere in the world, as you know. You saw what we did with Venezuela. That worked out very quickly, and we're doing really equally as well with, but again, people don't want to write about it, with Iran. Iran is very much intent. They want very much to make a deal. So far, they haven't gotten there. We're not satisfied with it, but we will be. We will be either that or we'll have to just finish the job.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio also said there had been some progress, but gave no details on the remaining disagreements. The comments came after Iranian state television published what it described as parts of a draft agreement. The report claimed the US would ease its naval blockade of Iranian ports, while Iran would restore shipping through the Strait of Hormuz within a month. It also said Iran and Oman would oversee vessel traffic in the strategic waterway. The White House dismissed the report as a complete fabrication. The Iranian report made no mention of Tehran giving up its nuclear program or handing over its stockpile of highly enriched uranium. Meanwhile, the US military carried out new strikes in Iran, targeting a military site in the port city of Bandar Abbas. US Central Command said American forces also shot down 4 Iranian attack drones near the Strait of Hormuz, calling the action defensive and necessary to maintain a fragile ceasefire. Iranian media reported explosions near the city. The latest strikes threaten the already fragile ceasefire between the two sides as negotiations continue to end the 3-month conflict that has disrupted global energy markets and shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Trump also said he was unconcerned about the political impact of a longer conflict with Iran, adding that Iranian leaders were wrong if they believed the upcoming US midterm elections would pressure him into accepting a deal.
In a related development, Iran says it has struck a US airbase in retaliation for an attack near Bandar Abbas airport. It comes as Iranian media report an unofficial draft deal aimed at easing tensions around the Strait of Hormuz.
Iran's Revolutionary Guard, IRGC, said it carried out a retaliatory attack on a US airbase, which was used to target outskirts of Bandar Abbas airport in the Hormozgan province to the north of the Strait of Hormuz. According to an IRGC statement, it targeted in the early hours of Thursday the US airbase from which an act of aggression by aerial projectiles originated overnight. The force said Iran's response was a serious warning so that the US enemy understands that aggression will not go unanswered, stressing that if it is repeated, the subsequent response will be more decisive. Thursday's encounter between Iran and the US was the second in days, following attacks earlier this week on IRGC's Navy, which the force said was retaliated by downing an advanced US military drone amid the stalled peace process inching forward by mediation of regional countries. Meantime, local Iranian news media, quoting the state-owned IRIB broadcaster, released on Wednesday the unofficial highlights of an interim peace deal with the United States. The draft includes framework of a memorandum of understanding based on Iran's 14-point proposal to end the war, signaling a potential roadmap toward easing long-standing regional tensions. Whereas both Iran and the US have been refraining from any major concession, The released draft says the U.S. has committed to lifting the naval blockade of Iran's southern ports in the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman. In return, Iran has reportedly committed to returning the number of commercial ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz under its control to the pre-war figures within a month. According to the report, the U.S. has also committed to withdrawing its troops from Iran's perimeter. And in the event that a final agreement is reached within a 60-day moratorium, it shall be ratified by a binding UN Security Council resolution. The draft MOU also reiterates that Iran will adopt no step without tangible verification. Turaj Shiralilu from Tehran for A News.
The Israeli military has ordered evacuations across large parts of southern Lebanon, declaring the area a combat zone ahead of expanded operations against Hezbollah. The Israeli Defense Forces told residents to move north of the Zahrani River, warning of, quote, great force in response to what it said were repeated ceasefire violations. The order covers hundreds of towns and villages and is the largest evacuation since the April ceasefire, raising fears of wider displacement. Earlier, Israeli airstrikes hit multiple areas in southern and eastern Lebanon, with Lebanese authorities reporting many casualties. US President Donald Trump is escalating his legal battle with news organisations after a judge dismissed his earlier filing, returning to court with a renewed defamation claim tied to reporting on his alleged ties to Jeffrey Epstein. A new filing sees Trump pursue at least $10 billion in damages from the Wall Street Journal over reporting on his alleged ties to Epstein. A judge previously threw out an earlier version of the case due to legal deficiencies. The disputed reporting referenced a birthday card to Epstein said to bear Trump's signature, which Trump says is fake despite being released by lawmakers. He's also suing the New York Times, BBC and Des Moines Register, all of which deny wrongdoing.
I wasn't a big fan of Jeffrey Epstein.
European Union foreign ministers meet in Cyprus, discussed possible future talks with Russia as the war in Ukraine continues. Several ministers accused Russia of showing no real willingness to negotiate and stressed continued support for Ukraine. The discussions come as Kyiv pushes for greater European involvement in diplomatic efforts to end the war. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said the focus should be on the substance of negotiations rather than who would represent Europe in any talks with Moscow.
I find that it's a trap that Russia wants us to walk into, that we discuss who talks to them and they are already picking who is suitable or who is not. Let's not walk into that trap. Negotiations is always a team effort. You have good cops, you have bad cops, you have a strategy, how you go to the table. So that's why the substance is much more important than who.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has arrived in Sweden for talks focused on defence cooperation, including a possible deal involving Saab Gripen fighter jets. The Swedish Prime Minister welcomed Zelenskyy at Uppsala Air Base as the two sides discussed a major new defence package for Ukraine. Kyiv and Stockholm have been exploring potential transfers of Swedish-made Gripen jets, while Sweden remains one of Ukraine's largest aid contributors since the start of the war. Large parts of Western Europe are experiencing unusually high temperatures for late spring. As forecasters warn, the continent could be heading into another summer of extreme heat and elevated wildfire risk. Spain's National Weather Agency says temperatures across parts of Europe have reached levels more typical of midsummer, with several countries recording unusually intense heat for May. In Madrid, tourists sought shade and gathered around fountains as temperatures climbed well above seasonal averages. Weather officials say Spain, Portugal and France have all recorded temperatures above 35 degrees Celsius, while the United Kingdom recently exceeded 35 degrees for the first time ever in May.
In Western Europe, indeed, there has been a spell of very high temperatures, not only in Spain, but also in Portugal, our neighbouring country, which has also reached 38 to 39 degrees Celsius. in France, where temperatures have also exceeded 33 degrees Celsius. In the UK, a milestone has been reached. For the first time since records began, temperatures have hit 35 degrees Celsius somewhere in the British Isles. It happened on Tuesday, and, of course, this is a temperature that would be extraordinary, even in the height of summer.
Staying on climate, the UN Weather Agency and UK Met Office say global temperatures are likely to temporarily pass the 1.5 degree threshold by 2030. The report also warns of faster Arctic warming, shrinking sea ice and shifting rainfall patterns.
The United Nations Weather Agency and the UK Met Office forecast global mean near-surface temperatures will range between 1.3 and 1.9 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Researchers say it is very likely the 1.5 degree Paris Agreement threshold will be temporarily exceeded for at least 1 year between 2026 and 2030, with at least 1 year likely to surpass the record set in 2024.
Temporarily crossing the 1.5 degrees threshold does not mean that we've failed the Paris Agreement, as this is referring to a long-term average over 20 years, rather than a single-year exceedance, which is what we're looking at in this report. However, as we get closer to that threshold, we expect to see more and more exceedances of 1.5 degrees, which has already occurred in 2024 when the global temperature was 1.5 degrees. And the science is very clear that the window to keeping the global average temperature to 1.5 degrees is closing rapidly.
The report highlights intensified warming in the Arctic, where winter temperatures are forecast to rise more than 3.5 times the global average, reaching around 2.8 degrees Celsius above the 1991 to 2020 baseline. It also says sea ice is expected to melt in March in parts of the Barents Sea, Bering Sea and the Sea of Okhotsk over the next half-decade.
And also the warming of the Arctic can cause quite significant impacts on weather systems as well. So the kind of cold Arctic temperatures kind of act as a barrier for the high up atmospheric winds in the polar vortex. And if these are disrupted by the warming of the Arctic, this could potentially disrupt the polar vortex and could bring more severe weather events, especially to kind of northern latitudes.
Forecasts also point to wetter winters across much of the Northern Hemisphere, including Northern Europe, Alaska, Siberia and the Sahel between May and September, while the Amazon is expected to become drier during the same period.
Uganda is stepping up efforts to contain Ebola, shutting its border with the Democratic Republic of Congo as authorities try to limit the spread of the virus. Officials say the restrictions will remain in place for 4 weeks. Uganda says the border closure takes effect immediately, with exemptions for Ebola response teams, humanitarian and security operations, as well as food and cargo transport. Officials say anyone authorised to enter from Congo must complete 21 days of self-isolation. Uganda has reported 7 Ebola cases and 1 death, while Congo's Ituri province remains the centre of the outbreak, with more than 900 suspected cases and over 200 deaths.
Uganda is temporarily closing the border with the Democratic Republic of Congo with immediate effect. The only exceptions are for authorized Ebola response teams, the humanitarian operations, the food and cargo transportation, and security. But all this still will be under the strict health screening and monitoring protocols across the border.
At least 16 students have been killed after a dormitory fire at a girls' school in Kenya overnight. The blaze broke out shortly after midnight at Utumishi Girls Academy Senior School in Gilgil and burned for more than 2 hours, according to Education Minister Julius Migos. 79 other students were injured, though most have since been discharged from hospital. Authorities say the cause remains under investigation. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll discuss the latest developments involving the US and Iran. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. US President Donald Trump says there will be no lifting of sanctions on Iran in exchange for Tehran handing over uranium, signalling continued pressure despite ongoing negotiations. Trump also acknowledged dissatisfaction with the current state of talks, saying Washington is not happy with the deal but remains engaged in the process. Joining me now is Ilan Skilom, his geopolitical analyst, joining us from Paris, France. Ilan, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Now, President Trump says there'll be no sanctions relief in exchange for Iran handing over uranium. Does that position narrow the space for compromise?
Well, that's a very good question. I think that Trump's position doesn't narrow the space for compromise. In fact, it structurally contradicts the logic of negotiation itself. I mean, you cannot ask a state to surrender its primary leverage while offering nothing in return. That's not a deal. That's capitulation with branding. And Iran has a very specific memory here. They signed the JCPOA in 2015, they complied, and Trump walked away unilaterally in 2018. So what Tehran learned from that episode is that American commitments don't survive presidential transition. So why would they trade hard assets for promises? So here's the paradox. Iran enriched more uranium under maximum pressure than it ever did under the JCPOA. So the policy produced the exact opposite of its state objective. So pressure without a credible off-ramp isn't strategy. I mean, it's escalation management dressed up as diplomacy.
Mm-hmm. And on the one hand, Trump says the US isn't happy with the deal but remains engaged. Is Washington trying to maximize leverage while avoiding collapse of negotiations entirely?
Well, yes, and I think that's actually the most coherent reading of what Washington is doing. What say President Trump is a classic dual-track posture in diplomacy. Keep the pressure maximum, keep the channel open, and never let the other side know which one is dominant. So the strategic logic is very clear here. But a complete collapse of negotiation has cost Trump doesn't want right now. It accelerates the Iranian nuclear timeline, it forces an impossible choice between military action and humiliation, and it alienates the Gulf partners who are quietly facilitating these talks. So yes, Trump is maximizing leverage, but leverage is only useful if your counterpart believes you'll eventually use it for a deal, not just to punish.
And from Tehran's perspective, Ilan, sanctions relief's always been central to any meaningful agreement. And without that incentive, what reason would Iran have to make major concessions?
I think that from Tehran's perspective, sanctions relief was never just an economic incentive. It was the political currency their leadership needed to justify any concession domestically. Without it, no Iranian negotiator can sell a deal to the hardliners. So that's been true since 2015, and it remains true today. But something changed dramatically. Khamenei was killed in strikes launched by Israel and the United States in February, and the new leadership is operating under an entirely different political logic. Existential survival, not negotiation calculus. So the question isn't what incentive Iran has to make concessions. The question, I think, is whether Washington understands that after military strikes, a ceasefire, and a leadership transition, the old negotiating framework is simply gone. You cannot apply JCPOA logic to a post-war situation. That's not diplomacy. It's fighting the last war.
Okay. And you mentioned maximum pressure on the US side earlier. Does that approach realistically coexist with sustainable diplomacy, or do those strategies undermine each other?
They are structurally in tension, and the last 18 months have proven it empirically. The Iran foreign minister said it clearly in February 2025. He said that maximum pressure will not be a negotiation, but a form of surrender. So that's not rhetoric. That's a precise description of the logical contradiction. So the theory behind maximum pressure is that you coerce an adversary to the table on your terms. But coercion only produces sustainable diplomacy if the coerced party believes there's a genuine exit, a deal worth taking. So now we are in a we don't know if the ceasefire will continue. We are in kind of post-war context. So Iran foreign minister called Washington demands maximalist and said an agreement was just inches away. So maximum pressure can force a ceasefire, but it cannot build a durable, a sustainable agreement. So those are two entirely different objectives, and confusing them is how you end up with a fragile pause that everyone calls diplomacy.
Okay. Now, the US and Iran have negotiated intermittently for years, yet mistrust remains, especially on the Iranian side. Is that mistrust now the single biggest obstacle to any agreement, or one of the biggest obstacles?
That's a tough question. I will say that you're right, mistrust is real, but calling it the single biggest obstacle actually lets both governments off the hook too easily. Mistrust is a symptom. The disease is structural between the US and Iran. Look at what's happened just the last 6 weeks. Trump said on April 12 that most points were agreed to, but the only point that mattered, I mean nuclear, was not. Then he immediately announced a naval blockade on Iranian shipping. That's not mistrust, that's two incompatible endgames running simultaneously. So mistrust matters, but the deeper obstacle is that neither side has yet defined what a sustainable agreement actually looks like, and both prefer right now the ambiguity.
Okay, one last question, Ilan. How much are Israeli security concerns still shaping Washington's negotiating position toward Iran?
I think less than it was, and that shift is one of the most significant developments in this entire confrontation. According to the New York Times, Netanyahu promised Donald Trump that military cooperation would lead to the fall of the Iranian regime. And that promise, up to now, proved incorrect, and it cost Israel its seat at the table. Israeli security sources say their leadership has been almost completely cut off from updates on the negotiation. Netanyahu himself has privately acknowledged that to Israeli sources that he has limited influence on Washington decision-making on Iran. And the emerging deal, as currently understood by Israeli officials, leaves core Israel concerns about Iran nuclear program and its uranium stockpile essentially unaddressed. So here is the paradox. Israel launched strike that triggered the entire escalation and now finds itself watching the diplomatic endgame from the outside. So what this tells us that Israeli security concerns still haunt Washington's position. They shape the military campaign together, and this military campaign created the crisis. But in the negotiation room today, American economic interests, Gulf energy flows, and Trump's transactional logic are now driving the agenda. Israel fought the war, but now I will say that the US itself is writing peace.
Ilan, it's been most insightful. Thank you so much for joining the program today and your analysis.
Thank you.
After the break, we'll take a look at the key stories shaping the region. Welcome back to A News, and now we turn to our regional stories. Russia to Armenia transit continues to move through Azerbaijan. A train carrying urea and flour has left Bilajari station for Armenia via Georgia, as Baku also reports rising exports and fuel supplies to Yerevan. A News correspondent Chimnaz Shahlar reports from the ground.
Russia to Armenia transit keeps moving through Azerbaijan from here, Bilajari station. A train loaded with 126 tons of urea and 67 tons of flour left Bilajari today, heading toward Büyük before continuing through Georgia and Armenia. So far, Azerbaijan has facilitated the transit of more than 28,000 tons of grain, over 4,000 tons of fertilizer, 1,033 tons of aluminium and 68 tons of buckwheat from Russia to Armenia. Armenia. Alongside transit shipments, Azerbaijan has also supplied petroleum products to Armenia. So far, this has included over 10,000 tons of diesel and nearly 4,000 tons of gasoline in total. According to the State Customs Committee, Azerbaijan's export to Armenia totaled nearly $10 million in January-April this year. I'm Chimnat Shahlar with Ilkim Mehdiyev for A News.
Staying in the South Caucasus, where Washington is stepping up its regional engagement. Senior US diplomats have held talks in Yerevan and Tbilisi, with trade, connectivity and security high on the agenda. A News' Nini Nikolashvili has the story.
Washington is stepping up its focus on the South Caucasus. In just days, senior U.S. diplomats held high-level meetings in both Yerevan and Tbilisi, signaling renewed American engagement in a region undergoing major geopolitical change. In Georgia, the U.S. delegation spent 3 days meeting government officials, opposition figures, and religious leaders with talks centered on trade, connectivity, and regional security. A key topic was the Middle Corridor, the trade route linking China and Central Asia to Europe through the Caspian Sea, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey. Cargo traffic along the corridor has been growing rapidly as companies seek alternatives to route through Russia. Georgia remains a crucial transit hub with US-backed projects such as the Poti-New port, highlighting Washington's economic interests in the region. Before arriving in Tbilisi, the same delegation joined Secretary of State Marco Rubio in Yerevan, where the US and Armenia signed the TRIP framework agreement aimed at boosting regional transport connectivity. The diplomatic push comes as Russian influence in the South Caucasus continues to decline, with Washington seeking a greater role through investment, infrastructure, and political engagement. For Georgia, the visits also carried a political message. Alongside meetings with government officials, U.S. diplomats also held talks with opposition representatives, suggesting Washington remains closely engaged with developments inside the country. Georgian Parliament Speaker Shalva Papuashvili said that Tbilisi acts in its own national interest, but the intensity of U.S. diplomacy this week shows the relationship remains a priority for both sides. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
And staying in the region, US President Donald Trump has backed Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan ahead of June's parliamentary elections. His comments came after Washington and Yerevan signed new agreements on strategic partnership, critical minerals and regional connectivity.
US President Donald Trump expressed support for Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan and his ruling Civil Contract Party ahead of crucial parliamentary elections. In a Truth Social post on Wednesday, Trump said Pashinyan completely shares his vision of peace and prosperity for Armenia and the entire South Caucasus region. Trump also said the US and Armenia would break ground together on TRIP, which he said would transform the South Caucasus and help American energy companies gain access from Central Asia all the way to the US. The endorsement comes just 1 day after US Secretary of State Marco Rubio visited Yerevan, where Washington and Armenia signed a strategic partnership agreement, as well as agreements linked to critical minerals and the proposed TRIP corridor. Trump's support also came as Armenians preparing for major election. Armenians are set to vote on June 7th in the country's first parliamentary election since 2021, which is seen as a key test for Pashinyan amid shifting regional alliances. Voters will not only choose a new parliament, but by extension, a prime minister. Armenia's growing ties with the West have triggered concern in Russia. On Wednesday, Moscow said it had warned Armenia that it could suspend or terminate supplies of discounted oil, gas, and rough diamonds if Yerevan continued pursuing its bid to join the European Union. The warning came ahead of the June 7th parliamentary election, with opinion polls showing Pashinyan's Civil Contract Party maintaining a comfortable lead over pro-Russian rivals. Armenia, a landlocked nation of around 3 million people, has traditionally maintained close ties with Russia and remains a member of the Russian-led Eurasian Economic Union.
To Central Asia now, where China and Turkmenistan are deepening cooperation on energy and connectivity. Their foreign ministers met in New York, where both sides pointed to major projects and closer bilateral ties. Mahnur Maktoum has more.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said that China is ready to work with Turkmenistan to act on the consensus reached by the two countries' leaders, advance cooperation on major projects, and inject fresh vitality into bilateral relations. Wang made the remarks during talks with the Turkmen Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Rashid Meredov held in New York on the sidelines of a United Nations Security Council high-level meeting. Wang thanked Meredov for making a special trip to New York to attend the Security Council meeting, saying that the more complex and volatile the international situation becomes, the more imperative it is to uphold multilateralism and safeguard the authority of the United Nations. China and Turkmenistan maintain close cooperation in the energy sector, with Turkmenistan serving as one of China's major natural gas suppliers through the China-Central Asia gas pipeline network. In recent years, both countries have also expanded collaboration in trade and connectivity. For his part, Meredov said that Turkmenistan highly values its comprehensive strategic partnership with China, noting that the two sides share deep political mutual trust, engage in frequent high-level exchanges, and enjoy strong momentum in pragmatic cooperation. He added that Turkmenistan is ready to work with China to advance cooperation on major projects, including natural gas development, expand collaboration in trade and connectivity, and elevate bilateral ties to a new level. Manu Maktoum, A-News, Beijing.
Let's turn our attention to Moscow now, where Russia and Afghanistan have signed a military technical cooperation agreement on the sidelines of an international security forum. Officials say both sides discussed bilateral cooperation, but no further details of the deal have been released. Tamim Bahis has the details.
The agreement was signed during the International Security Forum in Moscow, which is being held from May 26th to 29. According to officials, Afghanistan's Defense Minister Yaqub Mujahid and Sergei Shoigu, Secretary of Russia's Security Council, were present at the signing ceremony. The forum was initiated by Russia's Security Council and has brought together officials to discuss security-related matters. In a statement, Afghanistan's Ministry of Defense said Yaqub Mujahid and his accompanying delegation met with Sergei Shoigu on the sidelines of the Moscow International Security Conference. The statement said both sides discussed bilateral cooperation as well as a number of other important issues. The signing of the military technical cooperation agreement marks another step in engagement between Moscow and Kabul. No further details have yet been released about the contents of the agreement or the specific areas of military technical cooperation covered under the deal. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A-News.
And to Kazakhstan now, where Astana and Moscow have signed a major agreement to build the country's first nuclear power plant. The deal was one of 15 agreements signed during Vladimir Putin's state visit, with energy and trade dominating the talks. Fariza Kalimurzina reports.
Kazakhstan and Russia have signed an agreement on the construction of the country's first nuclear power plant. The deal became one of the key outcomes of Vladimir Putin's state visit to Astana. The project concerns the Balkhash nuclear power plant and sets out the main terms of cooperation, including financing. Construction is expected to be funded through a Russian export loan valued at $16.5 billion. Putin's visit is also unusual in diplomatic terms. This is his second state visit to Kazakhstan, something rarely seen under standard protocol. Moscow describes it as reflecting the level of bilateral ties between the two countries. Economy and energy dominated the talks. Russia remains one of Kazakhstan's largest trade partners, with a bilateral trade exceeding $28 billion last year and expected to pass $30 billion in the near future. Tokayev said cooperation continues despite global uncertainty. Russian direct investment in Kazakhstan has reached $29 billion, while the two countries are implementing 177 joint projects with a total value of more than $53 billion. In total, the two sides signed 15 agreements. Alongside the nuclear energy deal, Kazakhstan and Russia agreed to expand cooperation in the oil sector. This includes increasing the transit of Russian oil to China through Kazakhstan by an additional 2.5 million tons. Kazakhstan's Energy Minister Irlan Akhenjanov says this will require upgrades to infrastructure, including pumping stations and pipelines. The two countries are also discussing a possible gas route from Russia to China through Kazakhstan. According to Minister Akhenjanov, the proposed pipeline could carry up to 35 billion cubic meters of gas. Putin's visit comes as Astana hosts the 5th Eurasian Economic Forum, a major business platform for the Eurasian Economic Union. Nearly 3,000 delegates from 44 countries, including the United States, are taking part. The forum runs until May 29th, ahead of a meeting of the bloc's leaders. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
After the break, we'll discuss the significance of the Putin-Tokayev meeting in Kazakhstan and the broader direction of Eurasian integration. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. We now shift our focus to a regional story for discussion. Russian President Vladimir Putin is holding talks with Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev in Kazakhstan ahead of the Eurasian Economic Union summit taking place from the 28th to the 29th of May. Joining me now to discuss is Alex Reportify, a geopolitical analyst joining us from Chongqing, China. Alex, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Vladimir Putin's meeting with President Tokayev comes at a strategically important time for Eurasia. What are some of the most important discussion points and expected or intended outcomes of talks between the two leaders?
Well, you mentioned strategic. I would say it's more like strategic friction points between Moscow and its largest Central Asian neighbor. I mean, the primary dimensions driving this important high-level meeting, I would say, is deepening energy and infrastructure ties. We have to understand these two nations are very aggressive and very competitive when it comes to energy cooperation. I would say this is, dominating the bilateral agenda, serving as a vehicle to pretty much bind Kazakhstan's infrastructure to Russia's technical ecosystem, which, to the West, they would get concerned about, but to Russia, this goes back many, many years and nothing unusual. I would say business as usual here, but friends are with friends today.
Mm-hmm. And the Eurasian Economic Union remains central to Russia's regional integration strategy. How effective has the Union actually been in strengthening economic cooperation here?
Well, we have to remember, there is a China connection here. And it happened in 2013, where Xi Jinping came to Kazakhstan and did announce the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI. And Kazakhstan is a major, major player in that, as it has one of the largest overland routes. So seeing with the, Russia and the Chinese trade exploding over the last 3 to 4 years since the conflict, we are just seeing another, piece of the puzzle fall into place here. Now, of course, Kazakhstan has a balancing act here where they must keep their Western partners happy because there's investment from the West, and of course, balance the great relationship with Russia. But, having a barrel of oil over $90 a barrel, having potentially an upcoming shortage of natural gas and energy, Kazakhstan is in a perfect position and is definitely welcoming another powerful partner in energy, and that's Russia.
And how does Astana manage that balancing act, Alex?
You know, that is the difficult question, and a very good question. How do they do that? You know, we remember that old trick that people would do in restaurants where they would spin plates. Well, we're seeing it happen in real time here. It's very difficult. In one sense, we have to be, you know, kind of watching to see what Russia is trying to do here. Now, I know they are pushing and they outbid the Chinese for the nuclear power and got, you know, a huge contract for that. You know, this is massive economic trading partner for Kazakhstan, as well as also, you know, with great relationships that Russia has with China. We're going to see a closer tie between the three of them, not just Russia, China, but now Kazakh joins it. It's like a piece to the puzzle. And having that Belt and Road Initiative announced, you know, in 2013, that has really bonded this relationship for what it is today.
Okay. And now with Russia facing continuing sanctions pressure, is Moscow increasingly relying on regional structures like the Eurasian Economic Union to reduce economic isolation?
Well, we always are concerned about isolation here. But again, if we look at Russia on, you know, the international stage and what it's actually doing here, I mean, it's got 177 joint commercial projects underway with $53 billion in value. I mean, yes, that does highlight how critical Russia remains to Kazakhstan internal economy and development. But I would have to say that I don't see any concerns moving forward for these three nations. They are in a part of the world that the world needs their energy. Even though the United States claims to be the largest exporter of oil, it's exporting not all the oil that it can consume. It has a lot of fracking oil, so it does rely still on Russia and the Middle East for oil. So, you know, United States is kind of locked in a position here where they're in a wait and see. And Kazakhstan, for the moment right now, I think is doing all right.
And Kazakhstan also plays a major role in emerging east-west trade routes, such as the Middle Corridor. Does that create strategic overlap or competition with Russia-led projects?
You know, I don't think so. I think there's, you know, a big piece of the pie, a lot to go around here. And again, when you've seen, you know, 1/5 of the entire world's oil at a standstill in the Strait of Hormuz, you want to have partners like Kazakhstan, you want to have partners like Russia, and you want to have partners like China. These three nations can put political differences aside, or we'll say, you know, territorial differences aside, and still do business. That is the great thing about China and its Belt and Road, which has over 154 countries on board. And that's the great thing of Kazakhstan, always benefiting in the right spot. What a great time to be the president of Kazakhstan, in my eyes.
Okay, Alex, let's go back to the balancing act, if you like, with Kazakhstan to the foreign policy.
Sure.
So President Tokayev has often projected a careful, pragmatic foreign policy approach. How important is strategic flexibility to Kazakhstan's long-term positioning?
You know, good question. I mean, he must honor his historical security and trade ties with Moscow. You know, and I think this is symbolized by signing a new joint declaration on the 7 pillars of friendship. He is also simultaneously maintaining strict compliance with Western secondary sanctions. You know, Kazakhstan continues to actively court investments from the EU, China, and the United States, and the Gulf to avoid, you know, total dependence on Moscow. So again, it's a brilliant move, a tactical move, and a smart move in this geopolitical turmoil that we're enduring at this moment.
Okay, and now back to the Union. Russia frequently frames organisations like the Eurasian Economic Union as pillars of a multipolar world. Is Eurasian integration genuinely deepening or still constrained by competing national interests?
You know, I would have to say that it is deepening. We have to understand that if you get on the wrong side of, you know, the collective West countries, you are going to then be faced with the tariff ladder, or the sanction escalator, as I call it. And that just keeps ramping up until they try to break a nation. But you see, what has broken the mold here, which used to work over the last 40 or 50 years with the United States of America, where they would go in and bomb, bankrupt, and bully a nation, that hasn't worked with Russia. Russia has, I would say, outdone that. They've managed to revolutionize their banking system. They've survived without, Western support or Western companies. Their airspace, they've been blocked to Europe. They've survived that as well. And when you're talking, geographically, a huge amount of population here. Everyone seems to be concerned about 330 million Americans. Well, one of your neighbors has 1.4 billion. That's China. Another neighbor close to it, 1.5 billion, India. Well, you're well on your way to capturing most of the world's market. So I don't see any concerns, but keep deepening the ties.
Okay, Alex, thank you so much for joining us today on A News. It's been most insightful. I appreciate your analysis.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You're up to date with world news for the hour. Stay tuned to A News for more world news and updates from the region.